Look over there. Pete is going to sit in the booth across from the ATM. He's going to order roast beef and a Kaiser with a beer. I'll bring it over, ask how he's doing. He's going to say that he can't complain, and that's it. He mostly leaves a pretty good tip. Pete used to be one of the go-to guys at McBride's warehouse and his other activities, probably nothing too heavy, collecting some debts, making a scene now and then. Pete kept an apartment on top of an old auto shop right next to McBride's house. It kept him close and handy. McBride always wanted to be your pal. He insisted that you call him Bridie since all of his friends did. He's done a lot for me since I inherited this place. There used to be stories about how your power might go out or your windows might get broken if you didn't buy your supplies from Bridie, but that never hit me. We both went to St. Joseph's back in the day, so I get the envelope and the big bottle of Jameson every Christmas for old time's sake. If you are gonna bitch about Bridie, there's the door, pal. Now Pete went to St. Joseph's too, but he didn't like school. He tried to be a mechanic. He hated working for anybody but himself. And Bridie likes to do favors. And he likes to collect on them too. So he gave Pete jobs here and there, carrying something quietly or, picking something up without asking too many questions. And since he lived right next door, he could hand Pete some stuff, if anybody whispered, the search warrant is on its way. And there were a few of those. But Bridie, would give the cops a lot of noise about, how he's just a small business owner. And he emptied his pockets to get that senior home on Paisley Road fixed. And his wife volunteers at the church. And, you get it? Bridie was smooth with it. And Pete was the invisible next-door buddy. Made things a lot easier. Pete, had a half-dead 1974 Mustang. He worked on it most of the time. And the bar was open all hours of Pete's place. And that is not my business, but it sure as hell was Bridie's. And when Pete got pulled over working one of Bridie's errands over onto Windsor, the cops did not find anything, but it was too close for Bridie's liking. So he and Pete had the talk, and pretty soon Pete's, he's more of a watcher and a holder than a carrier. And Bridie had 5 kids. They were all under 10 years old. And this went down on a Sunday when his wife was doing her volunteer bit at the church. Bridie had put his kids in the backyard behind a fence, mind you. When he ran in and out of the house, taking calls at that big desk of his. But kids are kids, right? And Bridie's daughter, I think she was 4 or so, she found a hole in the fence and she ran onto that laneway between his and Pete's place, probably to pick up a ball or something. And Pete was reversing down the lane, probably buzzed and smoking the tires. That's what you do with a 74 Mustang, and he never saw the kid. And he probably just heard the thump under his back bumper and then the bump under his seat before hitting the brakes. Bridie hit that too. And he ran out of the house to see his kid, face down and bleeding every place. He tried to pick her up, but she was too slippery from all that blood, and he just sat beside her staring at Pete. Pete just sat in his car, probably thinking, oh, sweet Jesus, I've done it now. So he smokes the tires again. He makes it to the highway. He found a hotel outside of Brantford. He got a room, put the chain on the door, and praying that nobody saw him. Now I'm surprised I didn't find him swinging on the end of his belt. And yeah, Bridie was connected. But it's not like a movie, This isn't The Godfather or The Sopranos or anything like that. It's just that Bridie might know somebody who works at a bank and can check out the credit card so maybe he can see where Pete used his. And Bridie knows people at all these restaurants and motels he supplies. Maybe somebody can walk up and down the parking lots and read the license plates. So the next morning, Pete gets the knock, and it's old Harold Parker there. 2 cups of coffee and a bag of donuts if I know Harold. He's Bridie's lawyer. More than that, he's Bridie's guy. He's the guy you talk to when Bridie's busy but wants to play nice. Harold's got an office in Hamilton. He's got a summer place on the water in Port Colborne. Bridie does business with the guys up at his house, and Harold charms their wives and gives pony rides to the kids on the beach. He's a stand-up guy. He's been around 65 years old for the last 30 years or so. Pete lets him in. What's he going to do? And Harold told him what was happening next. And Pete had to surrender to the cops and admit that it was a horrible accident, not negotiable. But Harold was going to be there to keep him out of jail, all on Bridie's dime. And more importantly, Harold told Pete that Bridie's not out for blood. Now, of course, there were conditions. Harold drove Pete back to Hamilton and somehow squared it with the cops just enough to keep him out of jail, all under Harold's supervision, of course. And Pete had to go to the funeral with his hair combed, wearing a suit, all respectful. And when it was over, he was going to get the talk from Bridie again. This time it was going to be a long one. The funeral was about as bad as you'd think. Bridie's daughter had been cremated, which I don't think the church liked much, but like, what are they going to say? And her ashes, just in a plain urn kept at the top of the church. Bridie sat at that table, staring at his hands, like they had turned to rotting flesh, because he had claimed a lot of IOUs over the years. Like maybe 1/3 of those mourners were there simply because they were too scared to skip it. And when they walked past him and they offered condolences, Bridie looked desperate to rip up all those IOUs as fast as he could. I got a few minutes with Bridie and I told him how sorry I was. And he whispered something about, how it meant a lot to him that I was there. And if I had any unfinished business with him, it was going to stay unfinished. He did not want a penny or a favor from me, not now, not ever. And he also asked me to stay after the service and to help Harold keep an eye on Pete. So when it was over and the church was empty, he brought Pete a chair, and so he and Bridie could sit, face to face at a little table with that urn full of ashes between them. And Bridie spoke very slowly. He said, "Oh, this is me, not you. God hates me, not you. Something I did must have been bad enough that God killed me for my sins and took it out on her. I'm not going to hide from that. I'm a man. I'll pay it back. I hate you, but God hates me more." But Bridie wasn't done. He said, "I haven't eaten since she died. Everything tastes awful." Harold, old as he was, stood behind Pete and put his hands on his shoulders. Pete knew he could not stand up if he tried. And then Bridie leaned closer across that table and said, "Do you want to know what this tastes like?" He reached into the urn and he scooped up some ashes between two fingers and he opened his mouth. He shoveled them in, barely responding, just looking beaten and dead, because however bad they tasted, it was not worse than what he was going to taste every day for the rest of his life. Now, Pete had been pretty solid up till then, but the ashes were too much, and he tried getting out of that chair. Harold leaned down hard, and I moved into the table to make sure that Pete would not get very far if he tried anything. And then Bridie leaned forward, and he slapped Pete's cheeks. And Pete gasped in shock, and Bridie leaned forward and shoved his open mouth onto Pete's open mouth. And he held tight with their lips together and letting the spit and the ashes slide between them, and he did not let go. And then Pete and Bridie just stared at each other. Eventually, Harold took his hands off Pete's shoulders and he gave me the nod. And we went outside, leaving Pete and Bridie alone there under the gaze of Christ crucified on the wall behind them. And all this is what, 4 years ago now? It's over and done. Pete never moved away. People see him and Bridie up at the cemetery sometimes. God knows what they're talking about. I won't ask Bridie, and Pete is sure as hell keeping quiet. For just knowing about it sticks with me. I've had the same nightmare a few times about it, at seeing the two of them on this long laneway between their houses, both of them staring at that wide, bloody spot on the pavement, and nobody moves. Nobody says a word. I always hear an ambulance off in the distance, but it never arrives. It might show up someday. Yeah? Thank you for your time. Does anybody here who is willing to ask have any questions about the content tonight?
Mike, what the fuck is that Ashes story, man?
If I may be so bold as to quote, what the heck is the Ashes story? Do you want an honest answer, or?
Yeah, cut the shit. Like it was.
Okay.
But it moved me, and I'm still not sure it was in a good way.
To be completely honest, my father died of cancer around over 20 years ago. As he was dying, most aspects of that story fell into my head. Now, I have to make it very clear, my father was Baptist, devout Baptist. He was a church elder, among other things. He was not Irish. He did not have any ties to the Irish Mafia in Hamilton or anyplace else. But for some reason, the idea of that story where someone has been given a horrible, horrible situation and manages to do the right thing, Bridie does not kill Pete, was the way my father looked at it every day when he was very clearly dying. He was not going to be dead until he woke up one day and he was dead. There was always an issue of faith in religious terms. How it got reinvented to Irish Catholicism, I'm not sure. And I don't mean it disrespectfully. What I can tell you is that at around the same time, I was taking off to visit a friend of mine in Guelph. I actually had two different friends in Guelph at two different times. Both of them liked to go to the same pub, and the pub owner was very much that Irish guy who thought he was kind of a bigwig and was not, and that always stuck in my head. And as weird as it sounds, the character of the lawyer, Harold Parker was my great-grandfather. He was a businessman, he wasn't a lawyer. But when I put the character together, it had to be him. He was a tall guy, he was very accomplished, he could be charming. He is the type of guy who would charm his business partners' wives, and I'm pretty sure he would have taken kids on a pony ride on the beach in Port Colborne, where my family, my mother's family, came from. And the Ashes, this is going to sound melodramatic. It came to me in a dream. The idea, you want to see how bad things get? Here you go. When you watch somebody, forgive me, if you watch somebody dying, it does not get worse than that. And at the end of it, you can still respect what they wanted. You can still respect their beliefs. So, as weird as it sounds, I want to dedicate that story to my father, who does not have anything to do with the characters in it, but every sentiment of it relates to him. I wrote that almost 25 years ago and never forgot it. I have just tweaked it a bit to be more about Hamilton since I've moved here than Toronto. So that's my very long answer.